mask memorial. We're recording in progress. There's a lot of folks that unfortunately could not make it. We have about 90 people registered, so some folks are going to be jumping in and out, but it's going to be available for distribution after the fact. So with that, I want to start by introducing Dennis Murphy from Ventry Associates, a longtime sponsor of this Business and Government Forum. So with that, Dennis, I'll turn it right over to you.
Thank you, Alex, and our profound thanks to the Worcester Chamber. I think all of our mailboxes are inundated with a lot of meetings and Zoom calls that we don't find necessarily helpful or on message. Today's topic is extremely timely, extremely important. I want to thank Dr. Ellison and Attorney Moschos for agreeing to do this very informative meeting and conversation. And I think all of us, we represent a multitude of industries across the state. And I think it's a similar conversation across America in that one example we have is folks like the Peckham Industries who have leaders in the asphalt aggregate industry. And they have a situation where if one person on their road crew is tested positive for COVID, they have to quarantine the entire crew. So the economic effects and the links of economics to health is terribly important. It is a complicated issue. It's a healthcare issue first, and then, but there are legalities in it. So my profound thanks to you for putting this together, and we appreciate your participation and proud to be a part of it.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate the words, and he's right on the money with it. So with that, I will turn it over to Maria Fernandez-Dominique from Blue Cross Blue Shield to say a few words on behalf of Blue Cross.
Thank you, Alex. I too would like to echo what's been said about the fact that this is a timely and relevant topic and that we've all needed guidance and sort of support around. So thank you to our subject leaders in the medical and in the legal industry. For those that don't know, Blue Cross is proud to be a not-for-profit, community-focused, Massachusetts-based health plan that serves millions of members, thousands of businesses, and 80% of cities and towns across the Commonwealth, including the great city of Worcester. We have, since the onset of the twin crises of COVID-19 and racial reckoning, been working really hard with municipalities like the city of Worcester to address health inequities within our healthcare system. We've been led by our new health justice strategy and have been focusing specifically on increasing confidence in the COVID-19 vaccine and promoting equitable access to health and wellness opportunities. Just to give you two examples of the work that we've done in Worcester, we've partnered with the city's Department of Health and Human Services and the YWCA to relaunch the Fitness in the Parks program, and also collaborated with the city's Department of Health and Human Services, Girls Inc., Worcester Youth Center, YMCA of Central Mass, and Boys and Girls Club of Worcester to execute 4 youth and family-focused COVID-19 vaccine clinics. So from our commitment to addressing structural racism, as it has been shown by COVID-19 and racial reckoning, to our commitment to exceptional service, Blue Cross is so proud to be a true business and community partner to the city of Worcester. So thank you so much for having us here.
Maria, thank you so much. And thank you to Blue Cross Blue Shield, who has really become a strong partner of the Worcester Chamber and everything you guys do. We appreciate it. With that, I do want to introduce Kip Daniels from Maximus. Kip is, on our next series for a seminar, we're going to try to put together an event regarding something similar and how we can start doing testing and matrix and things of that nature that are going to be crucial for our legal aspects. So with that, Kip, I'll turn it right over to you.
Thanks, Alex, and I'll be once again a third echo, our participation in today's conversation, and look forward to the opportunity to visit further. But Maximus has been at the forefront with a lot of issues created by the COVID pandemic, whether it's been assisting states on the unemployment insurance side, providing contact tracing, and certainly now focusing our efforts on the vaccine administration. However, we actually engaged in a partnership around this time last year with American Airlines, and through a strategic partnership with a group called Dayon, to provide what we describe as a platform called Verifly to assist passengers returning to flights internationally. And why that's important as we kind of talk about the various mandates, we know that there's going to be requirements to gather vaccine documentation as well as ongoing COVID tests. And that Verifly platform has since expanded to include the ability to ingest vaccine documentation, as well as the ongoing COVID test requirements. We've actually also coupled our contact tracing experience. So it allows employers, as they're looking to comply with these various mandates and keep their employees safe. A platform that provides a complete end-to-end integration of the initial ingestion as well as the ongoing management of that particular documentation. In addition to the Verify platform, Maximus has actually been assisting the state of California with their immunization exemption program. And so we've actually begun working with a number of commercial-based employers throughout the country to ingest their immunization exemption requests, both for medical and non-medical, that provides otherwise kind of that arm's distance relationships where employers can have an independent third-party review organization provide a review of whether or not those immunization requests are in fact valid based on both federal, state, as well as local guidelines. So Alex, once again, we look forward to continue our conversation in the near future. And once again, thanks for the invite here this morning.
Kip, thank you so much. And please look forward to seeing the invitation for that presentation. And again, we want to make sure that we have all the up-to-date information for you and whatever technologies are out there to help your company continue to move forward and be in compliance. So with that, I'm going to introduce, before I start that, I just wanted to give a couple of factoids that, I thought were relevant. And I mentioned it to our staff at our staff meeting, but, right off the press, as of last Wednesday, 362 executive branch workers were on a 5 or 10-day suspension for failing to either attest that they are immunized or looking for an exemption. Another 141 employees, this is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, by the way, the state employees, 141 departed their jobs in response to the mandate. So again, very timely. Now, as we go into the private sector, how do we kind of continue going forward? So with that, let me just introduce, do a quick bio on both Dr. Ellison and Attorney Moschos. Dr. Ellison is a professor of medicine, microbiology, and physiological systems at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, and is a hospital epidemiologist for UMass Memorial Medical Center. He received his medical degree in 1977 from Hahnemann Medical College in Philadelphia and completed his residency in internal medicine at Rhode Island Hospital and fellowship in infectious diseases at University of Colorado in Denver. He is board certified in internal medicine and infectious diseases. Following his fellowship, he joined the faculty in the Department of Medicine at University of Colorado in 1984 and came to the University of Massachusetts in 1991. Very happy to have you here in Worcester, Dr. Ellison. And then with that, I'll go to Attorney Moschos' bio quickly. Mr. Moschos is of counsel at Seder Chandler, practicing in the law firm's Labor and Employment Litigation, Education, and Corporate Laws Group. He's a fellow of the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers, which includes the leading labor lawyers in the United States. He serves as labor counsel for various private and public employers in Massachusetts, regularly advising employers on labor and employment law issues. He routinely appears before the government agencies, including the National Labor Relations Board, the Department of Labor, and Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. He has conducted more than 600 labor negotiations in both the private and public sector. Attorney Moschos represents clients in education matters throughout the Commonwealth, affecting both public and private schools. He participated in drafting Massachusetts labor statutes. Mr. Moschos is a founder and former management chair of the State Joint Labor Management Committee and Worcester County Bar Association's Labor and Employment Law Committee, and was awarded the Worcester County Bar Association's Distinguished Service Award. With that, Dr. Ellison, I will turn it over to you for your presentation.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Alex. And let me go forward. Let me share this screen. Hopefully everyone can see it. So I'm just going to go over some of the science information regarding COVID with a focus on recent epidemiology, what we can potentially expect in the future, and the status of vaccines and the vaccine efficacy. Okay, so this is actually state data which I downloaded yesterday afternoon, showing what has been seen in Massachusetts, where we clearly had everyone remembers our terrible first wave back in the spring of 2020. We had a quiet summer, a major peak again, where we actually in Worcester, they had to reactivate the field hospital at the DCU center. And then we've had another rise this summer with the advent of the Delta variant, which is actually does seem to be dropping off statewide. You can see that these curves are matched by the testing data. The hospitalization data, I think, is telling you that the rate of hospitalizations has dropped off over time, and as well as the death rate, as we've gotten better at managing people in the outpatient setting. And certainly the advent of monoclonal antibody therapy has been a big help as well, and we're doing a better job in the hospital, although we still have a number of patients being admitted to the ICUs across central Massachusetts. This is data from last week from the state across what's being seen across the entire state. And I wanted just to mention this is that if you look at the average number of cases, Worcester County is really towards the top of the list of county. We were actually much higher. We've dropped since the week before doing this, but we've actually had a fair number of cases in Worcester County. What we're seeing at UMass Medical Center is our cases have been flat for the last 3 weeks, but there's been an upswing in cases in Leominster, Fitchburg at the Health Alliance Hospital, and an upswing in cases in Marlborough Hospital. So it does seem there's some slight regional differences within Worcester, it's Worcester County itself, in terms of the different communities having different rates of infection. Now, everyone has heard about the Delta variant, and I actually used to display, this is information from internal data from UMass, showing each of these clusters represents number of different isolates, so 68 or 100, which we have performed sequencing to determine what kind of variant of the SARS, the COVID-19 coronavirus. And I'm not going to go into great detail of at all in terms of the scientific background or virology, simply to say that it is beneficial for a virus, particularly a respiratory virus, to change all the time. We don't want any of our genes to change. We don't want to have mutations developing cancer. For a virus to survive and spread to other people, it has to keep changing, or it's, the one person's infected, it's going to get antibodies, stop shedding the virus, and it won't go anywhere else. So you can see that back in February, we actually had a good 15 to 20 different variants being seen here. Beginning in March, we began to see this one variant, B117, which was now been termed the Alpha variant, which showed up in England. And it actually spread and was the dominant virus here for 3 months. And then we saw, have to go back very carefully, in May, we began to see this other small variant, B1617.2, which was first seen in India, and which has now been renamed the Delta variant. And you can see that actually how much it spread June progressively, and by July and August, it represents essentially all of the viruses being seen here. Why is that? This virus probably grows faster than the other variants, and also goes to a higher amount. So there's about 1,000 more fold of this virus in someone's nose when they're sick than these other variants. And it means that when someone's got this, it spreads it, and people probably can spread the virus 1 to 2 days faster. So when we go back to looking at the other viruses in the past, it would take about 6 days before someone had enough virus in their nose to give it to someone else. It only takes about 4 days here. So if over a 12-day time period, it goes, 2 people are infected here, where a 12-day time period, 3 people are infected here. This clearly is much more infectious and is spread worldwide. If we look at, this is data from the CDC from earlier there, where you can see the same thing, which I just showed you in terms of Worcester, where it was a small percentage in June, and it has taken over completely. And as of last week, United States, it represents 99.8% of all the strains of US infections. Does that mean that this is going to go away, and once we control this, it's going to, we have past COVID? I would certainly hope so, but I expect that we're going to see continued variants emerging. It's the benefit of the virus to keep having different mutations show up. And I'm sure that there'll be another variant that's going to come up, which will replace the Delta variant. We certainly see that with influenza, why we give influenza vaccines every year. There are related coronaviruses, the same family viruses cause the common cold, and they cycle about every 3 years. So one of those COVID, there are 4 different ones. We'll see one variant, one of the strains, 1 year, 2 years later, it comes back again. And I think that's where we're going to be standing with going forward with COVID and the COVID coronaviruses. Now, the big question is how well does the vaccines work? And there's very excellent, great data that's coming out of the CDC in the last 2 weeks. This was published last Wednesday, and I'll show you some additional data since last Friday. This is looking at, everyone's heard about the virus they're having breakthroughs and people getting sick with after getting vaccinated. And that actually does happen. That is over here is the green line here. These are people hospitalized. So there have been a few cases of individuals really since the beginning that are getting COVID despite being vaccinated. But over top of this, this is the curve of people being hospitalized who have not been vaccinated, where there's a almost 11-fold difference in the rate of individuals being, who are ill, hospitalized, who are unvaccinated versus vaccinated. And if you look at, the worst outcome of dying, your chance of dying is about 11-fold greater if you've had if you've not been vaccinated. We can talk about what do we want a vaccine to do. It would be great if a vaccine stopped anyone from even getting the sniffles. But personally, I want a vaccine which keeps me out of the hospital. And I really, really want a vaccine which is going to keep me alive. So in this regard, the these vaccines have been really excellent. Now, there's another question which has come up in saying, well, what about natural infection? How well will we do with natural immunity? Can we just have people who've gotten sick with COVID, and tell them you're all set? Well, the CDC has done a follow-up study looking at this, which they published this on Friday afternoon. They looked at people hospitalized with a COVID-19-like illness who either had not been vaccinated or gotten one of the mRNA vaccines, which are the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines. And they found that the risk of being hospitalized and having a positive COVID test was 5-fold higher if you only had been sick with COVID and had COVID in the past, but had not been vaccinated. So vaccine really provide for much greater protection than having a natural infection, which is, I know it's a common question I've been asked, common question that I discussed with healthcare workers at UMass, whether they're trying to make a decision whether they themselves would like to get vaccinated. So let me stop at that point. I just want to go over that information and happy to answer questions after this.
Thank you, Dr. Ellison. Now, we're going to turn it over to Attorney Moschos, if I can get this moving here. Bear with me here. All right. Attorney Moschos, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And like Dr. Ellison said, I would thank Alex for organizing the forum and being the host of today. And I want to congratulate him on his promotion to Vice President of the Chamber. Well deserved. As Dr. Ellison indicated, and if we could go to my first, I think it's the third slide next, please. Next slide. And the next slide. Go to the next slide, please. As the chart that Dr. Ellison put up about Worcester County, unfortunately, Worcester County is a hotbed for the virus. Since January 2020, 1 out of 9 people in Worcester County have been infected. 1 out of 344 were died from COVID-19 virus. There are over 95,000 reported cases in Worcester County in total, and about 2,500 deaths. New York Times yesterday stated that worldwide there's 5 million people who have been infected, and in the United States over 700,000 is the leading country relative to deaths in the world. What does that mean for us as employers? It means that we have a problem in Worcester County with infection and of COVID-19. Next slide. Next slide. The answer that I'm currently asked, can the employer mandate the vaccinations by its employees? The simple answer is yes. This legal mandate is based upon a case in the early 20th century, actually the case in Massachusetts, where the United States Supreme Court upheld vaccination on a mandatory basis. So if we're going to defeat this virus, and as indicated, we'll talk about a little later on, President Biden, they're looking at the employer to close the gap where a significant number of people in Massachusetts and the United States, particularly in the South, are not vaccinated. Now, there are 2 exceptions to this. The Americans with Disabilities Act applies to almost all employers, and there's a Massachusetts counterpart. So if you're an employer of 6 or more, you're subject to the Disability Act. If a person has a disability, for example, if they have their system cannot tolerate the ingredients in the vaccine, or they have a sincerely held religious belief, they may be exempted from the mandate, and they have to be. But the employer has the right, and the employer has the duty to sit down in what's called an interactive conference and to discuss why the employee is disabled or not able to do something with vaccination. Similarly, on religious beliefs, and this is the area that's been a lot of controversy relative to the vaccinations, is that people claim they have a sincere religious belief. And we've seen on the internet so-called churches being established where for a fee they'll get a certification that that church holds that it's against their religion to be vaccinated. So the employer has the right to inquire and to understand the employee's disability and also the sincerely held religious belief. And there is a check. If it's an undue hardship, then the employer may not have to accommodate the employee. Next slide. Next slide. Now, there's certain best practices. Go next slide, please. That should be followed by the employer. I recommend that the employer have the employee themselves get the vaccination. Because it avoids you have to get involved in providing the vaccination. Particularly, for example, there in the Pfizer situation, there are requirements relative to being kept on ice and just storing the vaccine. This is it's simple. There is a lot of sites available, particularly in the pharmacy. That they have been issued now the vaccine, and so it is not that difficult to go to your local pharmacy and get vaccinated. The employer also has the right on an individual basis, privately, to inquire on the status of vaccination of the employee and whether they have been vaccinated and whether they have been fully vaccinated. So you have the right to inquire that information. The individual name of the employee should not be released, and your medical documentation, many employers are taking a picture of the CDC card, should be segregated from the general personnel file and be kept as part of your medical record that you keep on every employee, which the medical record would normally be the sick leave notes and other medical documentation regarding a particular employee. So that's something you need to be sensitive to, that you should not broadcast individual names of people who have not been vaccinated. Vaccination inquiry information is a medical process, and therefore you need that confidentiality. Next slide, please. As most people know, President Biden has issued an executive order to OSHA to establish an emergency standard relative to vaccination for employers of over 100 employees. It was announced yesterday that the United States Office of Management and Budget has approved the proposed emergency order, and it will be sent to the Federal Registry to become published. So it's expected probably by next week, we will have the OSHA order and policy relative to what has to be done. There are many questions. I have been faced with many questions regarding what is anticipated to be in this OSHA standard. As I stated, it's subject to 100 employees. Those less than 100 are not subject to the OSHA standard. It is expected, however, to count the 100 employees on a basis of a company-wide employee count, not by a site count. So even though you may have an office in Worcester with 20 employees, but your company has 5,000 employees nationwide or worldwide, it is expected the order will say you are subject to this requirement. Second, there's been a question raised about Massachusetts cities and towns. Will they be covered by the OSHA standard? In 2018, the legislature adopted a law that stated that municipalities were subject to the OSHA standard. This will be an OSHA standard. The question is whether the Massachusetts Department of Labor standards will enforce this particular standard. It's really going to be the state government's determination of whether cities and towns will be subject to this mandate. So can't give you a definitive answer at this time, but we can assume that there will be some guidance from the Commonwealth about cities and towns. It is expected that the standard will require the employer to give paid leave time to employees to get the vaccination, and will also have to provide paid time off if the employee becomes sick as a result of the vaccination. Anecdotally, I understand, and maybe Dr. Ellison will answer this later on, that usually the first shot, at least with the Pfizer, did not have much of a side effect, but the second shot did have some side effects. I had a similar situation. Not major, but there was a side effect. There's going to be, in this standard, that an alternative will be provided, that the employers must provide at least once a week testing of their employees. It's unclear whether the rapid test, which is not as effective as a PCR test, will be considered appropriate for the testing. We'll have to wait to see if the OSHA standard provides. But this will have to be done. Also, it's unclear who will pay for the test and whether people taking the test will be granted paid leave or not to take the test, to see on the weekly test. So those are questions that we're unable to answer today, and expect to have that next week. So just to get summarized, employers of more than 100 will be subject to this emergency standard. The alternative will be a weekly test. There are many questions still available. Unfortunately, they have not published, so we can't give you guidance today. But I do expect, as I've indicated, that if the total company census, you have to pay time off to people get vaccinated, time off if they get side effects. You have the alternative, you have to provide the alternative of a weekly test for your employees who don't get vaccinated. Now, contrast, next slide, with the federal executive order to federal contractors. They will similarly have this mandate, but there is no restriction relative to the 100. There is a issue relative to being 50 employees or more, and there's no testing alternative. So if you are a federal contractor, you have this mandate even if you're not 100 employees in your census. Similarly, hospitals and nursing homes, they are subject to an executive order for those hospitals and nursing facilities that receive Medicare and Medicaid funding. They have to mandate vaccination, and there's no testing alternative. Because almost every hospital and nursing home is subject to Medicaid or Medicare, that means all of hospitals and health facilities have to be requiring vaccination. What about collective bargaining? We do have both public and private employees, members of the chamber who have collective bargaining units. Where the employer requires employees to be vaccinated, that involves a mandatory subject of bargaining. Meaning the union has to be told about this policy, and there may be a bargaining requirement. Where it's mandated on you, for example, under the federal law, where it's mandated, the bargaining will be what's called effects bargaining in the private sector, or impact bargaining in the public sector, where you have to give the union notice of the vaccination requirement and sit down with the union to discuss impacts. My experience with the employees have done this, although some unions seek to get a pay raise to get vaccinated, the employer, where it's mandated, for example, the local board of health, that if it's impact bargaining, that you talk about such things as the vaccination leave and side effects relative to that, or the testing requirements and who's going to pay for the test and where they're available. So there is a collective bargaining organization. We don't have time to go into further obligation, but just be aware of that. And the public sector employers will have to see if there's going to be similarly requirement depending on what the State Department public standards does. Next slide, please. On September 30th, the federal COVID-19 emergency leave program ended. They have not been extended. The common misunderstanding. Those programs have not been extended. What has been extended is the Massachusetts COVID-19 leave program, which went into effect in May of this year. That program has been extended to April 1st of 2022. And that program provides for 40 hours of leave. Unlike the federal program, which had 80 hours of leave, there's only 40 hours of leave, paid leave under that program. This paid leave counts from May. So if someone's already used up their 40 hours, there's not a mandate to give them another 40 hours. The leave is similar to the federal leave. It covers quarantining, isolation if you are infected, obtaining a diagnosis if you have symptoms, or treatment for the disease. In this extension, there was an expansion of the eligible leave coverage to include care of family members who have to go be vaccinated or suffer the effects of vaccination. Now, in addition, I want to point out, it's not on the slide, that in Massachusetts, we have the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. And that act provides for paid medical leave of up to $850, which is going to be extended. And so that an employee may have that available to them. And all employees in Massachusetts, so there are very few exceptions, all employees subject to employment insurance are covered by the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. So that is also available relative to persons who become sick through COVID-19. Finally, I want to point out incentive programs. If you provide to your employer group health plan, a wellness program which provides incentives, there's a question relative to if you provide incentives for people to get vaccinated through your health plan, you need to be careful of the components of that program. I've cited the letter that was guidance that was issued on October 4th, 2021 by the United States Department of Health and Human Services, by the Department of Labor, and by the Treasury relative to those wellness programs. And if you are going to give more than a nominal incentive to the health program, you need to check that to be sure that the wellness program doesn't violate the federal regulations dealing with wellness programs. That brings us to the end. I just want to reiterate, contrary to some arguments, employers have the right and they will have the duty to provide and mandate vaccinations. I encourage everyone to do this. If we want to go back to normal, we need to have our employees vaccinated. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellison, Attorney Moschos. Thank you. A lot of good information there. But before we begin with any questions, I do want to let you know that we will have this. This is being recorded. I will be sending this out to all the folks that are registered. So you'll have this. And of course, I'll make sure this contact information for Attorney Moschos, and I can make sure I get some stuff to Dr. Ellison if you have any data questions. So with that, I will let folks start with the, if you don't mind, just put a hand up or the icon for hand up, just I want to keep this kind of organized at some level. There's a lot of folks on the call, so please. Well, I know it's always hard to kick it off with the question, so I will begin. And one of the questions that I received from somebody who unfortunately is not going to be able to join us today, they had a conflict, was, and probably Attorney Moschos, this is probably more towards you. How long in between the first shot and second shot does an employee have to be able to document it for their company if required under a vaccine mandate?
It's my understanding that there'll be dates set out in the temporary emergency standard about what date that employers will have to be fully vaccinated. As you indicated, Alex, the Moderna and Pfizer have 2 shots. Johnson & Johnson has 1 shot. So we'll need to look at that date. There was some talk in September that things should be completed by November, but obviously we're now on November 2nd, so that's not going to happen. So there will be a time frame set out, I believe, in the order.
Thank you. Sujal?
Thanks, Alex. But my question is for Attorney Moschos. Great content here, a lot of great information. My name is Sujal Balakia from ArcPoint Labs. We do provide a lot of B2B testing for workplace. My question is antigen testing acceptable for weekly monitoring, or it's just going to be PCR?
That's an open question, whether they will accept both or only accept one. And I've not heard anyone discussing that other than saying that those 2 tests are the ones that they're considering, not other tests. So those are 2 tests, and whether they will allow both tests or mandate the PCR, which is Dr. Ellison can confirm that, but I believe the PCR test is more effective in determining whether the person has the virus or not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael from Integrated Pharmacies. Mike, but you're still muted, Michael. Michael? There you are.
My question is, if you have an employee that has chosen not to be vaccinated, their primary responsibility is off-site out of the hospital managing other clients, and those clients have requirements of vaccination in place. So it basically makes it impossible or very, very difficult for that person to do their job. What are my options?
Well, under the expected order, and the employee who doesn't have a disability and doesn't have a sincere religious belief, they don't have an option to say, I won't be vaccinated. If they fail to do that, you have the right to take disciplinary action. Now, some employers are saying, we're going to put them on unpaid leave and let them continue their relationship with the company. Other employers are saying that if you don't get vaccinated and you're not qualified for the exception, we're going to terminate your employment. So you have the right to either put them on unpaid leave or to discipline them, including having them terminated from employment.
Thank you.
Attorney Moschos got a question from Janet. Do you suggest employers under 100 offer testing as an alternative to being vaccinated?
Well, personally, I think we should mandate everyone to get vaccinated as an employer because of the risk to other employees. Because again, Dr. Ellison can confirm this, but I believe even if you're vaccinated, you can be a carrier, and therefore you can create a problem for other employees. And if you're unvaccinated, certainly you could be a very major carrier to others. So if you're under 100 employees, I still recommend that you consider mandatory vaccination program.
just comment, yes, it is correct. Someone who has not been vaccinated can still transmit to to someone else. And people are, we do know that there's asymptomatic transmission. Testing, particularly with an antigen test done only once a week, is only going to tell you whether the risk of transmission is for that day or for the day before or the day after. It's not going to tell you anything over a course of an entire week. So if you do testing once a week, you're basically covering about half the week, and the other half the week, you're going to have no information whatsoever.
All right. Anybody else have a question for either Dr. Ellison or Attorney Moschos? All right. Well, seeing no more questions, I know there was a lot there to unpack. Again, I'm going to be sending out this entire recording. Please feel free to reach out to me directly or Attorney Moschos at his law office, or I can make sure that Dr. Ellison gets any kind of questions when it comes to the health aspect of this. But I do again want to thank Blue Cross Blue Shield and Ventry Associates for sponsoring this. Again, a lot of stuff here and a lot of information that we wanted to get out right away because it is timely. We should be hearing some direction from OSHA and on the federal level, as Attorney Moschos alluded to, and probably start seeing. I presume that the state government will probably start following suit shortly after that. But again, thank you to everybody for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Thank you.
Alex, are you going to put this on the website, our presentation?
Yeah, everybody's gonna get a copy of this via email, anybody who registered this, and I'll make sure there's a link to it to make sure that you can watch it right directly from our server.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
To everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Ellison.